Continuing the series on what you can do with a Corona knitting machine, let's make a knit woven hat. I'm using the CH1500. This is the only Corona that I own, so what I'm telling you next is theoretical based on reading, but I believe this technique will work on all models of Corona. Manual knit weaving places the embellishment on the purl side of the fabric, making the purl side the right side. Here, the main yarn is a number 1 or fingering weight, and the embellishment yarn is a number 4 or worsted weight. Because the purl side is the right side and we're still using a hung hem, we want the hem closure to be very neat, and I'll show you a change from the first pattern that makes it look like this. I did succeed in knit weaving one hat with a fuzzier yarn as the embellishment yarn. This is a very fuzzy, slubby number 5 yarn, and I only got it to work that once. It jammed as often as it worked, so I can't recommend yarn quite this fluffy. My main yarn is a composite of 2 industrial yarns run side by side. It's working just fine. A single strand of fingering yarn will also work. You'll want to get about 7 stitches per inch. The basic pattern is the same as the stockinette pattern, which is knit 30 rows for the hem, hang the hem, knit 55 rows for the crown. Hem is knitted at main stitch size minus 1 whole number. Crown is knitted at main stitch size. Anywhere during the first 40 crown rows, you may add the embellishments of knit weaving that I'll show you here. It can be as often as every other row or as far apart as 6 rows apart. This hat will fit a toddler. To give a very neat finish to the hung hem on the outside of the work, instead of casting on, we begin on waste yarn and go straight into the main yarn, no cast on. Then, when it's time to hang the hem, we lift the very first row of main yarn stitches and hang them on the needles. Lift 3 stitches, or 1 at a time if you'd rather. But if you get just the right waste yarn, the waste yarn will fold right where it connects to the main yarn, as this one is doing, making it very easy to pick up. At the very end, you have to unroll it to catch stitches. And do not be dismayed, you will be 1 stitch short of the number of needles. That's the nature of hanging the underside of the stitch. I always like to knit back the first row from hold because it behaves better, since there are 2 sets of stitches on there. Manual weaving is a way to get an embellishment on the purl side of the fabric using a yarn that would never ordinarily knit successfully on the machine you're using, whether it's too thick or too stiff or too fluffy, whatever. There is more than one way to set it up. Here I'm going to E-wrap every 4th needle across. And if all goes well, the net result will be that the green yarn is caught in the stitches, but it is not knitted, which would be disastrous. It would jam the machine, but it'll still embellish the fabric from the purl side. I always like to do this pretty much on every machine by pulling the needles all the way forward and letting them knit back from hold. Same as always, the reasoning being that with the needles all the way forward, they've already been pushed through the stitches, meaning we've done half of the work the carriage normally does. And it'll make it a little bit easier for it to meet the challenge that we are now setting for it. Okie dokie. Forward, trying to make sure none of it's sticking up. Run the carriage along slowly. And in it goes. Beautiful. I'm working without clamps because this is the only workstation open to me right now, and clamps won't fit. Usually I can get by with it because the touch of this machine is so light. Weaving makes it tougher. Now my yarn tail's on the other side. Let's try a little bit different weaving method. Just over and under 3. One neat thing that this does, besides allowing us to use yarn that's basically inappropriate for the machine, is use odds and ends of yarn to create a lot of decorative effect. This green yarn is nothing special, but it's so different in texture and color from the base yarn that it will create a hat with a lot of interest. And of course, everywhere you add a layer, you make the fabric warmer. This isn't very much, it is true, but it catches more air, and that will be more insulation. It can feel a little bit stiff to knit because you've got to go over the bumps that the thicker yarn has made. See how it's under the yarn that creates the stitches, but it's not in the stitches? That's the goal. Now the yarn is at this end. Let's try E-wrapping again. E-wrap, or let's alternate. E-wrap, then over and under, 1, 2, 3, 4. E-wrap, 1, 2, 3, 4, over and under, and alternating across. Neat. Now let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got 28 rows knitted, and I disturbed these needles, and when you do that, it's always best to knit back from hold. I need a total of 55 rows, so I'll go on and knit those and scrap off. The hat is finished by sewing the edges of the work together and gathering in the crown. There is one finishing video that covers all the hats in this series if you need more help with that.